Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to the Future of Work, Water Cooler Conversations, radio show and podcast, where local business leaders share how they integrate humanity and technology through innovation approaches, healthy culture, flexible workspaces, and seamless virtual technology. We are your hosts, Jennifer Burwell and Kyle McIntosh. This podcast is brought to you by Max 6, building better communities where people and businesses thrive. First, Jen, good to see you.
Hello, good to see you as well. I am so excited today to have Jen Coyne, CEO and co-founder of the Peak Fleet, and Brian Stinson, the culture engineer and co-founder of the Peak Fleet, to join us in this really important and timely conversation. When we were talking about how to build healthy cultures, Brian and the Peak Fleet and Jen just popped right in my head of somebody that we have to talk to learn more, because every time I am around Brian, I learn something, and I could listen to you talk all day long because you were so eloquent with your words. And I've heard so much about you, Jen. You're not local here to Arizona, so I haven't actually, right now we're meeting for the first time, but I'm so excited to have you both. So welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with just going all the way back. Kyle and I love to do this on the show. Tell us where you're from and then how you got to where you are today. So Jen, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I kind of grew up all over the place, but I was born in Minnesota. My dad was in banking. People always ask if he was in the military because we ended up moving around a lot. And so I spent time in Southern California and Texas. And finally, they kind of moved back to Chicago area, so Midwest again, when I went off to college. And so, I think that influenced me a lot in the work that I do today, because I was constantly sort of having to build my own team, right? Build that team of friends and support in all of the places that I lived, and knowing how, exciting and yet challenging that can sometimes be. And so moved to Portland, Oregon, which is where I reside, about 24 years ago or so. And it's definitely the longest place I've ever lived. And so call that home today.
Wow. Yeah, I bet that has had to have been a mixed blessing between, as a child having to move a bunch of places and reestablish friendships, but also probably helped inform your perspective and understand, the different parts of the country that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that has influenced me a lot is that people from the Midwest, especially of certain cultural backgrounds that I happen to belong to, don't like to show emotion a lot. And so you have to become really perceptive about how people are feeling and sort of like read in what's going on, because they're not going to always show their cards. And I think that, definitely differs in different places in the country. What people care about changes a lot. And that also, we in the business of doing work with teams that we do now, it's really about empathy and understanding is a huge piece of it. And so having perspective and living around the country, traveling, all those things inform your perspective taking more. So I think that it has helped me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, how about you? Where were you born? How'd you get here?
Well, I grew up in Washington State. I was born in the Seattle area, although I grew up down near Portland, Oregon, very close to where Jen lives now. What I just learned, since I've known Jen for 14 years, what I just learned is I left Washington for Arizona about the time she moved there. I think I left in 1995 when I came to Arizona. I was a little bit about my childhood. I was raised by an entrepreneur. I thought I was going to be some kind of business tycoon. If you're old enough to remember Family Ties, I wanted to be the next Michael P. Keating. And then only 6 months before college, I discovered that something called engineering, which I thought engineers drove trains, that I loved math. And there was this pre-calculus class that I was taking, and the teacher said, if you'd like this is what engineers do. And he wrote the average salary of an engineer. And I said, sign me up for that. And so that one moment, like 5 minutes of exposure to engineering changed my complete trajectory. What the interesting thing, though, is I then spent 21 years as an engineer in high tech, but doing IT stuff, which is where I met Jen. But my passion was people and culture and teams, which led to my final job at Intel, doing something very similar, and then to then Jen and I starting the Peak Fleet. But it's been interesting that since leaving Intel and starting the Peak Fleet, I got to return to those entrepreneurial roots that I had kind of developed 30 plus years ago.
So interesting how sometimes life can be full circle or multiple circles. So you spoke to it a little bit, but I'm so curious, how did you two meet? And then how did the Peak Fleet become to be?
Well, I'll take this one, Brian, if you don't mind. So we actually met first. We got thrown into a team together back in 2006 when Intel had one of its sort of restructuring activities. And so I was put onto this team, and we were kind of going through some similar life events at the time and sort of bonded over that common experience that we were going through and just became good friends. We ended up having similar job roles kind of throughout the years after that. And so ended up in working relationships too. And especially toward the end, as Brian was doing the sort of people strategy, people engineering role in IT, the job I was having was all around employee experience and making a good employee experience for the users of technology across the company. And so we ended up working together. And then I actually left Intel a few months before Brian did, again, through another period of restructuring. And I started doing some gigs, some consulting. And we sat down one afternoon. Brian was up here with visiting his family. And we ended up sitting down one afternoon just to kind of see where we were at. And I still have the text messages of us saying, like, I think he said afterwards, like, I was excited about the prospect of maybe doing something together before we met. And now, like, I think we should go for it. And we did. We really didn't look back after that. But the cosmic story that I have to tell about this is we aim to start our website, because you're not a business, so you have a website anymore in these days. And we aim to put it out, I think, on November 1st. That was our goal. And of course, with tech, things always get delayed. And so I remember, I think I was like having a glass of wine on the 18th, and I get this text from Brian, who had been working with one of our friends on getting our website launched. He's like, it's live. So officially our start date was on November 18th. And about a week later, maybe give or take, I get an email from Brian, and it says, like, holy shit. And I was like, oh no, what happened? Did our website die? What happened? And inside the email, he had been looking for something from me from 2 weeks ago, but ended up pulling way old emails from me to an email from 2010, October of 2010 exactly. And I had been my mom passed away that year. I'd been having lots of vivid, weird dreams. And the email that I sent him in October of 2010 said, does the date 11/18 mean anything to you? And it said, because I had a dream, and in it, you were either leaving Intel or changing jobs. And turns out then that was a premonition. So I classify myself now as a futurist. So,
how
aptly in the future of work.
That is wild.
Yeah, true story.
The new goal for our show is only cosmic stories. That's pretty good.
Right? This isn't even like, the conspiracy theory show here about cosmic premonitions, but it happened. So we took that as a sign that we're meant to be doing what we're doing.
Absolutely. I'm reading Glennon Doyle's Untamed book. I don't know if either of you.
Yeah.
And she talks a lot about the knowing and going within and knowing. And also I do, Karen Nowicki is one of my business professional coaches. And so she helps me with a lot of this, but it's all about like those signs and, going within and trusting that that's where you're supposed to go. And it's funny because my kids watch Frozen on like a loop a million times, but Frozen 2, I think they talk about like the next right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to just really trust that. And dreams are such a powerful vehicle. So that's like a big extension because there was a big time gap, right?
Yeah.
How many years was between the dream and
6 years.
6 years.
Yeah. But just trusting that intuition and that's a wild story. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us how you guys got interested in working with teams. I know you guys did some of that work at Intel, but what sparked that interest for you guys? Brian, maybe you start.
I'll start. You, well, one of my analogies is riding on the airplane, that once you've flown first class, you don't ever want to go back to coach. And I think Jen has the same experience that I do, that over our careers, we'd worked on great teams with great culture, with great leadership. We'd also worked on the opposite of that. And once you've experienced amazing culture where you feel like there's a clear sense of purpose, you have a connection to your coworkers, you feel like your manager has your back, you have clarity of success. It doesn't feel like work, that you just want more of it. You don't want it ever to end. You want everybody to experience it. And so that's what drove us while we were at Intel of we kept volunteering. In fact, that was one of the reasons why our paths kept crossing, because we kept volunteering for side projects or task forces around organizational health, leadership development. I remember Jen did a tour around China, delivering a leadership development workshop that it was just a passion of ours. But I think it's because we had experienced it. And I suspect a lot of the people who think this stuff is touchy-feely or unnecessary, maybe they've never flown first class and they don't understand how much better it is. The great thing about first class culture is it's not 3 times as expensive as regular culture. It's actually just the same price. You just have to do the basics.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. That's so interesting because I was reading a session just before this about team health, and I said something very similar of we all want these complicated solutions because when you're on a high performing team, like it really feels amazing. And so you want that feeling, but we all think that like to get that, there has to be some very complicated equation and really it's just going back to the basics and doing the things that are not always, sometimes they're monotonous, sometimes they're boring. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if this really makes a difference, but it's that consistent, dedicated effort over time that really gets you where you want to go. So it's validating to hear you guys have that same experience. So, sorry, Kyle, I feel like I haven't let you even ask one question or get a word in. Feel free to jump in whenever you want to. But if we're talking about teams and culture, well, I have 2 questions that jump to mind. One is for you, Jen, when you are going to like China and doing leadership courses, is there differences with different cultures or is it like the same components no matter who we are anywhere in the world, or is there anything to consider there? Mm-hmm. And then also we talked about it briefly, but just let's dive in a little bit deeper. What are the keys to creating this healthy team and culture that we're talking about? So
Jen, yeah. As far as cultural differences, absolutely there are. I mean, some cultures tend to operate more hierarchically. So they're looking for, the designated leader to sort of role model and set the tone for the team. Other places are more democratized and more flat, and people are looking for, who's got the most influence, the most insight, those kinds of things. And so I think you have to tailor it, but, it's less different than you would think. The funny story I have about that is that we would do this particular training we would have kind of a fun theme that would go along with it. Maybe it was like Vegas or Hawaii or, tropical, like we would have these different themes. And I said to the teams over there one time, what do you want to do? And it was going to be in December. And they said, we want to do Christmas. And like, for whatever reason, my preconceived bias was that like, why would that be something that they would want to celebrate, let alone have as a theme for the training, right? And so, fundamentally we're more alike than we are different. We all kind of want the same things out of our lives. And I think we'll come back to this later when we talk about our drive toward unity. But, people tend to have similar values and things that they want. And so we've found especially with some of our values work that's gone all around the world now, that these things resonate, even in our English language interpretation of it, people said, yeah, it's pretty spot on. So
yeah,
we roll with it.
I think that's such an important point to remember for all of us, is that there is more that unites us than divides us. And that on a human level, we all want very similar things.
Yeah.
So Brian, tell us a little bit about so if I'm a leader and I hear about, having a healthy culture and high performing teams, and I want that, but I don't exactly know what to do. What are the keys to creating that? What does a leader need to do to help set that in motion?
Well, there's a couple of things. There is one framework what actually brought us together almost 3 years ago. You were doing a series of workshops around the 5 dysfunctions of a team by Patrick Lencioni. So there's a great framework there. Although the start of his framework is trust. I think that there's a layer before that. It's purpose. I don't think you should do anything without clarity of purpose. But you shouldn't have a team. You shouldn't have a company. You shouldn't do a podcast. You shouldn't do anything without purpose. So start with why, and having that clarity. But then the model that that did bring us together. There's what Jen just talked about. While there are nuances that are different by culture, there's a lot of things that are absolutely universal. So universal meaning, having clarity of purpose, having that sense of human connection that we talked about earlier. We are humans and we're wired for connection. But then on teams, taking the time to invest in trust, which usually requires us to be vulnerable with each other, so that we have enough trust that we can engage in healthy conflict. And I think that's probably, from my experience, the number one reason I see a lack of cohesion or a lack of a high-performing team is that they're not engaging in healthy conflict. They're guilty of what is called artificial harmony, that they're not really saying what they think. And that doesn't do anybody any good. A lot of times it's well-intended. I don't want to hurt any feelings. I don't want to rock the boat. But by not saying anything, you're actually making it worse. And so, but from a leader's perspective of making sure clarity of purpose, there's a lot we can talk. We could probably spend the rest of the time talking about the value of values, but also having a sense of where we're going. Whether it's a fancy vision statement or just some clarity about the destination or the next step. So if I have a leader who understands me, which is another really important part about trust and connection, so if I feel like my manager gets me, and I have a sense of purpose and I have connection, and we are investing in trust on the team so that we can engage in healthy conflict, usually the rest of that framework that we've talked about, usually that falls into place, all the other pieces. So starting with the foundational pieces of purpose, values, vision, trust, healthy conflict. Mm-hmm. From there, then it's about fine tuning or maybe diagnosing a specific problem that we need to address.
Yeah, I have my notebook. I'm just taking a bunch of notes. I completely agree. And I think what you were talking about vulnerabilities is such a key component, because if you have a leader who isn't willing to go there, the trust process, I don't know that you can really fully have trust. And yet I think it's getting a lot less. And I guess I should ask you guys if you agree that, vulnerability and trust and all that, for a long time it was, there's no place for that in the workplace, and that's touchy-feely stuff. And
fake it till you make it, right? That was always the saying.
Exactly. And I see that the tide is changing. But are you guys seeing the same thing? Or are you still seeing some holdouts?
Are you asking if vulnerability is the new sexy?
Yeah, I am actually.
I think to an extent. I think there's probably a little bit of confirmation bias from our perspective because we've been embracing it and encouraging it for years. But I I am definitely seeing more of it. What about you, Jen?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's the willingness also of the leader to get more vulnerable. I think that that's where, I think that people on teams have been hungry for it, but the actual leader being willing to say, I don't have all of the answers, and I don't know, but hey, here's like what we should do about it, about learning more. Here's what do you think on the team? What do you think is the right answer? And really asking for input, right? Those kinds of things break down a lot of the barriers.
Yeah. So in March, when the pandemic first came and everybody was panicked, I jumped on a call that Patrick Lencioni was leading. So 5 dysfunctions of the team. And everybody, I mean, there were Fortune 500 companies, there were small businesses, there was everybody. And everyone was like, what do we do? And his advice was to leaders, even leaders of publicly traded big companies, was to be vulnerable and show your staff that you don't have all the answers. You're not sure what's going on. And to take time in their meetings. There were Fortune 500 companies who were taking 1 and 2 days in the midst of this pandemic to have team retreats to focus on trust and also to answer the question, how are you really? And having CEOs help their teams process all the information, and then also check in with all the personal things. When going to the store is no longer a 20-minute excursion, and finding toilet paper is a 4-day process. So it was just really interesting to see that that's what the big companies were doing, and the leaders that Patrick Lencioni admired. And then he did a follow-up call probably like 2 months ago. And those companies that were able to do that, they were able to be more innovative and solution-oriented and pivot quicker because of that culture. So
yeah,
I think it was fascinating.
Yeah, I think that, I try to find silver linings in a lot of situations. And I think that there are many in the COVID experience that we're all going through, is that, it's a leveling the playing field. Everybody's got their dog and their kids and whatever, in the background of them. And it's showing the humanity, it's showing the, common experience. And it's kind of allowing a window open into people's lives that I think a lot of people held back on. To not go off on too much of a tangent, but I think it relates to some of the other things we wanted to talk about is, people tend to wear masks at work. I do a show all about authenticity, right? And it's hard for people to be authentic. I think Harvard Business Review found that like 50% of people feel like they can't bring their authentic selves to work every day. And when we do values exercises, people will often ask us, is this me at work or is this me at home? Right. And so that just shows that you kind of feel like you're putting on your clothes for work and you're putting on this mask that says, who am I supposed to be today? And COVID has sort of allowed a window into how people really are and allows for different conversations about capacity and things like that to happen with more empathy and understanding, I think, than we've ever had before.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that. I don't think a lot of people, or I think it's new to a lot of people, that they would explore what their individual values are. It's this discussion that goes into what are our collective values? What is our collective purpose at work? But it's rather new to think sometimes, what are my values? What is my purpose here on earth? And how am I fulfilling that? And then how does that align to the company's vision or not? How do you facilitate that discussion and introduce that to people so that they start to think in that way and they're coming to work as a whole person as opposed to this, I'm a silo at home and at work?
Brian, do you want to take that one to start?
I will. I do, but I want to touch on something that Jen asked and that she triggered some additional ideas. Back to that, what advice for a first-time manager or a new manager? It was this discussion about moving into the old normal to the new normal, the pandemic. One thing for leaders is that it's very clear in our minds what needs to happen, what the message is. And so we say it once and we think it's clear. what I have learned is that as a leader, you usually have to say things 7 times, 7 ways before everybody actually hears it and processes it, which is a little bit frustrating for leaders. I think during the pandemic, it's been 2x that. And so just remembering you have to keep communicating over and over different channels. The other thing for a new manager, which will bring us back to the question, is remembering to check in. And sometimes there's this fallacy of a manager that I'm either supposed to manage and supervise, or I have my other work to do. And really, your purpose as a leader is to make sure you're checking in with your employees, make sure they have a sense of purpose, making sure that there's a sense of connection and a clarity of what success looks like, whether it's a year from now or a day from now, but also checking in and making sure that you're seeking to understand that every employee, every team member feels understood and understood at that authentic self. So the question, we do work with clients both on values at the organizational level and the personal level, and we encourage starting at the personal level. And so the tool that we use to help people discover their core values is a deck of cards. There are multiple ways of doing it. There are other decks of cards, but we like the tactile nature of going through a card sort. And spoiler alert, there are no bad values in the deck. So it's a matter of really being introspective and thinking about what's most important to me. Because if you think everything is important, then nothing's important. And so making some hard choices about all of these good values, but then what are the ones that are really most important to me? What are my non-negotiables? What can I not live without? And that's where the magic happens of getting to that clarity of these 6, 5, 4, 3 values that are really, really important, non-negotiable. What we believe when you get to that final number of we like to finish with 6, we think those 6 values do represent your authentic self. And when you feel comfortable bringing that into the workplace and not just tolerated, but truly accepted for all of those values and for what they mean to you, that's when the magic happens. You are more productive. You are more creative. There are higher levels of innovation. There's lower levels of defects and lower rates of absenteeism and health issues, et cetera.
So let's stay on that topic for a second of good values and bad values. And you said there's no bad values, and I agree with you because there's just different values that people.
There are some bad values. There's no bad values in our deck.
There's no bad values in your deck.
There's no lying, cheating, being a bully in our deck.
Okay, all right. I've noticed another thing happening. I think the 4 of us have probably seen this happening in business for sure, and just all over the place, is that there are misalignments of values, and even within your deck of all good values, if you go into it as these are my values, and if you're different, then you're wrong, then it can seem like there are good values and bad values, and so that's not necessarily the case. It's just different values. We're different people, even though the purpose might be aligned. We're here to experience humanity together, to fulfill the purpose of a business, to whatever that is. How do you deal with that sort of, if I really believe that my values are the right values versus just the right values for me, where it might feel like I'm misaligned with someone else?
I suspect both Jen and I want to answer this. I'll jump in first and then I'll let Jen answer. So I'll tell you my thought and then I'll tell you a personal story. I believe that most, maybe even all conflict isn't about the person or the issue. It's that we have different values, but we don't know any better. And so there may be a conflict of values where something that's really important to you is not important to me, or vice versa. Or we may both have highly important values at a personal level, and there's some tension between them. Actually, I have 2 personal stories, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jen. 14 years ago, when I first did this exercise, maybe it was longer, it was a group of similar managers at Intel in the IT group, and there's one guy in particular I didn't get along with, and I got along with almost everybody. We did this exercise, and his number 1 value was something that I discarded at the very beginning. as not important to me. And I thought in that moment, I get you now. I understand why we've had conflict, and I never had a problem working with him ever again. That's an example of where something was number one to him was not important to me, and that caused a conflict. Jen and I, one of my values is independence. One of Jen's core values is collaboration. So they're both good. They're both important to us, but it creates a little bit of tension. There's times when I want to kind of do my own thing, and it might feel to Jen that I'm not being collaborative, which is really important to her. And there's some times when she wants to collaborate that I want to do my own thing. It feels like she's trying to tread on my independence. So the fact that we have transparency, I know her values, she knows mine. I know the value of the guy 15 years ago. So you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to change your values. But if you create transparency, you can at least have a conversation about the difference and find some kind of common ground. Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I'll mention is that, we talked about organizational values, right? You develop organizational values, and we then encourage people to develop behavioral expectations based on those values. Because ultimately you can have a value, but if it doesn't translate into what you do, then it's not real. And so, let's take the example of like tradition and change. Those are two values that we have in our card deck, seemingly opposite things. If you have a company that values innovation a lot, someone with an affinity for change and transformation might have an easier path to sort of seeing themselves aligned with that organization. If you are tradition oriented, maybe you still can align to that goal of innovation, that value of innovation, but it's a different path, right? Maybe it is about reflecting on the things that have made you really successful in the past, or embracing those types of techniques or innovations that have really done well for you. And so you really can come together with and see eye to eye about things, but understanding why, someone with tradition is going to have more resistance maybe to quickly changing things all the time. That creates an understanding that then, you can choose to work together to embrace everybody's perspective in that.
Mm-hmm. The question just popped in my head as you guys were talking. Do you think values are nature or nurture? Like, how does one develop values? Where do they come from?
I think it's my answer, and Brian can answer because we don't always agree. I think that it is a combination of both. I think that you are predisposed, in your DNA, maybe to be more of a adrenaline junkie or something like that. So adventure is part of your value set, things like that. I would say that the balance of it, though, probably a more than 50% is sort of that nurture, those experiences that you have, the culture you grew up in that shapes the values that you develop and how you kind of define them. I think that's one of the reasons why the behavioral exercise is so important, because two people could pick security, for example, but have very different thoughts on how you get there. And I think when you look at a lot of the divisiveness we see like nationwide across the US right now, I think that a lot of the values are similar in what people are going after, but people just have different thoughts about the way to get there. And that we need to have better understanding about the paths that we take.
Brian, what do you think? Nature or nurture?
My answer is the same. Yes, both. Both, but also another question that comes up almost every single time that we do a values exercise is, do they change? And in general, your values are fairly static, but they do change. They do change. So this is to the nature over the course of your life. As you have major life events, they will absolutely shift and change your values. Starting your career, changing your career, getting married, having kids changes your values. Getting divorced, experiencing death, going through a pandemic probably affects your values a little bit around safety, security, maybe even it might test if you have values around, community and collaboration. There's some things that have absolutely, tested those values in the last year. So I think it's, again, there's, like Jen said, we're probably born and predisposed for some things, but then our experiences do shape them over our lifetime.
Yeah.
I read an interesting article earlier in the pandemic about how it's almost forced us to contemplate that we're only here for a finite time. And what are our real values? Because you're exactly right. They're being tested in various ways. And so, and to Jen, to what you were just saying too, we're being almost forced to talk about these values outwardly in different ways now. And so it's causing conversations that we wouldn't have had before, where in many ways we're probably having these conversations so we can get closer together. But in some ways, it seems like you're right. There's a national conversation going on right now about values where it seems like there can be a lot of friction and misalignment. How do we get to a place where we can have that discussion more openly instead of just making assumptions about people or assuming that people's values are bad values because they're different from ours?
So this is the place where I'll plug that when we created the Peak Fleet, partially we were just looking for a name, but we also thought it was really important that we establish our values from, day one. And we came up with persistence, empathy, authenticity, and kindness being 4 of, I think there was like 10. And we finally narrowed it down and said, no, these are the 4, and they became our namesake. And I'll come back to that, which says, I think having a facilitated conversation is helpful, right? Understanding how you get to healthy conflict is really helpful. But it does come back to being persistent and using empathy and authenticity and starting with kindness, right? We always say like kindness is like cheap or free, right? If you assume good intent out of the gate and really seek to understand, seek to get that perspective taking, I think that people start in their place of bias and all of their experiences. And it's really hard to see something from a person's perspective where, they live in a different part of the country, they're from a different socioeconomic background, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many elements that go into that. And it takes patience and some skill to sort of facilitate that conversation to where it doesn't go off the rails. And I think social media is the example that people talk about so much, where the rhetoric and, people get into battles with people that they thought they knew, people that they thought that they were friends with, because they are having trouble perspective taking and kind of getting into that empathetic standpoint while remaining authentic, right? I think telling it like it is from your perspective, that's your authentic truth, is fine. But without being checked by empathy and perspective taking, I think it becomes problematic.
I'll add on one thing, Kyle, that there is so much division. There's so many things to argue about. People want to argue right or wrong. And I think values help us have a conversation, or a different conversation, that there's, instead of talking about a political platform or a position, talk about values. There isn't a right or wrong. There may be some good and bad, like we talked about, but there isn't a right or wrong. And so we think that there's this transcendence above politics, religion, other kind of geo-cultural, ethnic differences. We think values transcend all of that, because it isn't a right or wrong. It's about what's inside of me. And if we can expose that and put it out there and be transparent, we can have conversations that could unite us. Like what we saw last week at the Capitol. There was some folks on one end of the spectrum, and then there's some folks on the other end of the spectrum, who were looking on horrified. I suspect if we sat them all down and did a values exercise, we probably could find some common values that we could, create a path of unity around.
It's interesting because I think about like this moment that we're in, and there's compounding things that are happening, right? The pandemic, some of the racial injustice protests that we had over the summer. There's just a variety of things. And so I think collectively as a nation, we're in this fight, flight, freeze state, and we're in a heightened state. And then if there's things that we hold so valuable or true to us, and we feel like they're under attack, and everyone is experiencing that, it's like you can't have a rational conversation when we're in that space. So I go between, myself included, like there's a side that's very wrong to me. That's like, this is black or white. But then when I go back to this empathy and think about like, how do we find some commonality? Because there are people like that experience that you said, Jen. There are people who are my friends, colleagues, people my kids go to school with that I think on a human level are good people. And then I see what they post on social media. And it's like this mind twist of like, this is the opposite of my values, but I know you are a good person because I know you in real life. So I guess my question is, how do we cool the temperature enough? How do we get out of that fight, or freeze so that we can have a conversation? And social media might not be the right platform. What is the right platform to have these conversations?
I mean, creating community is certainly a great place to start. I know that after the events last summer around racial justice, I joined a couple of groups where we began talking about these things, creating safe spaces. I think, scientifically, like all the research shows that when people are in a scarcity mindset, like you mentioned, you get into this place where having a long-term discourse, having, things that aren't about your immediate problems is very difficult. I mean, people are stressed about a lot of things, right? Their businesses are going out of business and jobs are lost or furloughed, all of these kinds of things. So I think one tip, for everybody right now is really centering and taking care of yourself first and being really present, understanding, are you actually at risk at yourself right now? Because we get into a fight or flight as if we're being chased by a tiger. The reality is we're not, but that tiger might be like not being able to pay rent, right? So what are those things that you need to focus on right now? Be present and tackle those issues with an eye toward how can I help, right? How can I help and what help do I need, and asking for help. And I think that if people did that more, ask, what do you need from other people, instead of just being so quick to say, this is what my perspective, this is what I need, maybe we'll get more balance out of it, right? But just say, like, how can I help, right?
The other thing that's helped me personally, when I really enjoy debating, and I enjoy conversation and exchange of ideas. And sometimes that doesn't go very well because the other person that I think we're having just a spirited debate about, we're not debating, we're arguing. But anyways, it's just, every time I remain curious instead of convicted, so much better. And I learn more, because in both states, I am still like, I really am wanting to hear their perspective, but the convicted part like shuts people down. The curious side opens people up. And so I have to remind myself that I don't know the answer. And just because it's true for me doesn't make it true for someone else. So
yeah, definitely. When we talk about empathy, we talk about listening, kind of use your eyes, your ears, right? And your feet, right? Go try to experience the things that other people are experiencing. Listen to their stories and give them credence. Like, when someone tells you something, believe it, right? I think, there is let's set aside like actual false information that's being put out there. But when you're talking about someone's human experience, you have to respect that that's how they feel about that experience. Give them that safe space to talk about it. And then, just ask clarifying questions until you really feel you can understand what they're going through. So that's a curiosity piece.
It's a good add. I was going to jump in with two things that are interrelated. One is the power of empathy. Unfortunately, you can't make others be empathetic. So it's on you to demonstrate and practice and role model empathy. But with that, another great book, another great framework, the 4 agreements. Agreement number 2 is to never take anything personally. That anytime anybody says or does something to you is about them and not you. So remembering that, and practicing agreement number 2 makes it a little bit easier to do the seek to understand, to take the other's perspective. Or like, well, why did they march on the Capitol? Are they bad people? Well, maybe, but I think my empathy says they feel like something about their freedom, which is really important, has been violated or was at risk. I don't agree with their approach, in response, but I sense that for a lot of those people that there is a value that's important that I might even share, that they felt was threatened. But again, what you do with that that's a different conversation. So again, empathy, and then just remembering that it's not about you, it's about them.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about this? The 4 of us are onto something, I think, and taking a pause to understand where someone is coming from, and empathy, and not just jumping. What did you say, Jen? Curiosity, not conviction.
Yeah, that's good.
And community, and all these things. And I think it dawned on me the other day. Let's take 2 moments in time of what was happening in this country and the differences between how our country reacted to 9/11 and the differences, the juxtaposition to what just happened at the Capitol, and people coming together versus people being driven apart. How do we, without another act like that of 9/11, have people take a pause and reflect really on where are these other people coming from? I mean, what if the 4 of us can continue this conversation, and anybody that's listening to this show, we would, I'm sure, encourage to take that pause, understand where others are coming from, but how do we as a country begin to have that conversation, become more unified as we really are, much more closely than we're expressing it or it's being shown. What do we do here?
We have this moonshot idea of what we think we would like to see. I think you brought up 9/11, which is a great juxtaposition, right? I think that we as a company, and this translates into business, right? We're here talking about business as well. We often saw it at Intel, we saw this too, that you do really well when there's a common quote unquote enemy, right? And there was this external force sense with 9/11 that we had, like, we could all unite against this external enemy. I think now with COVID, number 1, it's an invisible enemy. It's caused challenges. And then with this internal conflict we're having within our country, that it's a much harder thing to tackle. And we have to, I look at it the same way I approach like my interpersonal relationships. Hey, we're on the same team, you guys. We're all supposed to be on the same team. And so one of our moonshots is it's got to start with leadership. What kind of team building does the Senate do? I want to do a values exercise on the floor of the Senate. All 100 people, coming together, talking about their values with each other. This transcends political party, transcends religion, transcends where you come from, geography wise. So that's, Peak Fleet wants to do, that's what we want to do, because we feel like obviously our leaders have influence over people's actions. We're seeing that for sure. If we can role model that this kind of conversation is important and that we're on the same team, we're trying to get to unity and unifying lots of different perspectives toward prosperity and health and humanity within our country, that's where we want to go.
I love that idea.
And to kind of springboard off that, what if we talk about the future work and mega trends. We're seeing the younger generation not wanting to identify as anything, not wanting to identify with a political party, with all sorts of aspects of their lives. But I do think they identify with purpose and values. So what if the next generation of politician didn't run on a party platform? What if they ran on their values? What if? So just think about the kind of the revolution that could happen in a positive way if people were saying, instead of this policy, instead of this, this party position, we're going to run on peak values. I'm all about persistence, empathy, authenticity, and kindness. And if you like that, vote for me. If not, vote for the other values.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what could happen.
This is a funny story and not exactly appropriate, but I think it does a good representation of what we're looking for, what we're talking about in a different way. But so there's a representative in the Arizona State legislature. On his Twitter account, he likes young women, and he also is like retweeted like some adult content and all this stuff. And someone found it and was calling him out about it and saying like, this should not be part of our legislature. And what's your response to this? This is a big scandal. And I appreciated his response. I don't agree with his actions or his values necessarily, but his response was, I am an unmarried man who has an attraction to women, and nothing I've done is illegal. And what would you like me to do? Do you want me to lie about who I am and what I value? Or would you like me to be honest about it and show you who I am? My district voted for me, represented, and if there are people who are concerned, talk to me. So it was refreshing in a weird way that a politician was able to at least be authentic to himself.
Authentic,
yeah.
I would like to see it in a little bit more of a positive light, but I mean,
I think it is. It's I think to go on this a little bit further, right? There's a lot of talk about like this being against the First Amendment and all this kind of stuff. It's like people have free speech. People also have the freedom to disagree, and there's also consequences that they could face from that. Absolutely, I would rather see. My radio show is all about authenticity, right? I want to see people be their authentic selves and then let people choose, right? And if people say, I'm going to vote with my feet away from you, right? And vote with my money away from your organization or what have you, like, then you have to decide what is more important to you. Is it to stay with whatever behavior you're participating in, or to change to align? And I don't think that that's like brainwashing. I think that's just sometimes there's a collective voice that says we have to be better, and this is how we think we should be better.
Yeah.
So, that takes bravery.
Absolutely.
To sit there and say you're different from me and that's okay. And if you vote with your dollars to go somewhere else, that's a good thing, because we have figured out that we have different values and it's just not a fit.
Mm-hmm.
That takes real bravery that I'd like to see more of. It's a good thing whether we're aligned or disaligned, but we've figured that out openly.
Right. And I think coming back to like from an organizational standpoint, whether you're talking about the organization of the Senate or you're talking about your own company and their values, is that there are values that you define as an organization of what's acceptable and what's not. Brian will talk a lot about the price of admission or kind of table stakes values. And so you have to put those out there, and then you have to be honest with yourself about what you value, and do they align? And if your values aren't served by the organization you're with, or vice versa, if you can't serve that organization with the values that you have, then it probably is time to move on to something else. And I have found that myself over time, where my values didn't align with the organization anymore, and it was time to go choose a different path. And I think that's a huge act of bravery as well, because, we're talking about people's livelihoods and, their power and things like that. And, it's hard to just say, I'm walking away from this, but we are seeing some of that happen.
Absolutely. So we only have 5 minutes left, but Senator Sinema or Kelly, if you're listening, that could be a first step. Reach out, connect with the Peak Fleet. But we do have some questions that we always ask every guest. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours about this. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. So Let's see, Kyle, do you want to start with your question that you always ask?
Sure. I'll preface it as I always do with this question has nothing to do with anything necessarily, but it's a curiosity question that we're collecting answers to from our guests. What is your favorite book of all time?
That's a hard one. Brian, he mentioned one of them, which was the 4 Agreements. I know that was one of his.
4 Agreements is good. The 5 Dysfunctions. I say I'm going to have to go with the one that was the most impactful on my entire life, and it was Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yep.
Yeah, all of those are good. I think there was one that it's just a little bit different. Maybe isn't like my favorite of all time, but it's called Creative People Must Be Stopped. And it really talked, tongue in cheek, right? But it just talks about the different ways that our innovation and our creativity gets stifled, starting with ourselves all the way through to our society and how you can break through that. And that gave me some bravery to do things my way.
Very cool. Good. I love this book list we're building. All right. So for my question, what is one thing that you've learned through the pandemic, either personally, professionally, whatever, that it's a life lesson you're going to carry forward with you?
Do you want me to go, Brian? I have. So Brian and I had a conversation last month, and it was I felt like it was a breakthrough thing. We were having a little bit of tension, as you do. It really came down to the vulnerability of us being willing to say that we were pushing ourselves too hard and we needed to take some time. We're both ambitious, high achieving type people. And we also, our business was at risk, right? We've had to totally pivot during this pandemic. And so we were just going harder than we had been even before. And the big lesson for us is we have to make it through. And the only way we're going to make it through is to take care of ourselves.
It's a good one, a hard one, but a good one.
I'm surprised we've got an hour and we haven't talked about Brene Brown. Ooh. Her podcasts, plural, this year have been really insightful. And one of her first ones around FFT, effing first times, and needing to normalize it, put it in perspective and reality check expectations. I've got a Post-it note I've got right here. But recently, after an interview with David Eagleman, the expert from Stanford on neuroplasticity, so this is related to what Jen was talking about, she added a couple of strategies around basically brain fatigue. And that was a breakthrough for me that, I felt like I'd kind of gotten my hands around dealing with these effing first times and, making sure you have realistic expectations. But then I was just really struggling with fatigue, and it wasn't physical fatigue. It was something else. And so learning that your brain does get tired, you need to give it some rest. It may not get sore like your muscles do, but it does get tired, and needing to let it rest and give yourself some grace was something very powerful.
Yeah. Did you listen to Day 2?
Yes. Day 2. Yeah.
All of those really relate, but Day 2 is very similar about, just once you get past the newness and the adrenaline wears off, the, trudging through is exhausting. And we have been through an exhausting year, 2021. But when it was the 7th, all over the internet was like, I had my 7-day trial and I would like to politely decline. It's like, oh gosh. But a few things before we let you guys go. Where can people get your beautiful values cards if they would like to purchase them?
I think so www.thepeakfleet.com, but you can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and there's links back to the website. There's not only the physical deck, we have a booklet around, first of many booklets. This one's around family conversations using the values. We have our next intended booklet is around career conversations using values. And then because we can't really do a lot of things in person anymore, for groups and teams and for our workshops, but also for people like yourself who are facilitators, there's now a web-based version of the exercise using the exact same images from the card deck that's available on our website.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that last part. That's awesome. Great.
It's a fascinating conversation, and we could continue it forever. We'll have to continue this, whether it's on the show or not. And Maybe if we keep doing it today, my brain actually will hurt like my muscles. But thank you both, Jennifer Coyne, Brian Stinson, for being on the show. It's been a fascinating and I think enlightening conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Future of Work, Water Cooler Conversations, radio show and podcast with your hosts, Jennifer Burwell and Kyle McIntosh. We are off to continue building better communities where people and businesses thrive and shining a light on local business leaders who are defining what a healthy and productive workspace looks like in Arizona and beyond. To be a part of the conversation, join us for a tour of the Max 6 Entrepreneurial Center in Tempe, Arizona, or visit max6.com.